Somewhere between 2012 and right now, something happened in the Caribbean that almost nobody saw coming. A small island, 2.9 million people, no oil, no massive mineral wealth, no sovereign wealth fund sitting in some government account earning interest, decided it was going to become one of the most financially disciplined nations on the planet. And it actually worked. While the rest of this region was borrowing its way through every crisis, cutting corners on reform, watching currencies weaken and waiting on commodity prices to do the heavy lifting, Jamaica was pulling off something that almost nobody in the developing world has managed in the last 30 years. It was cutting its national debt in half. Not restructuring it, not kicking it down the road with some IMF sleight of hand, actually paying it down. From 147% of GDP in 2012, all the way down to 64.9% by 2024, in 12 years. Through a global pandemic, oil price shocks, and more than one hurricane. And that debt story, that is just thing number one. Jamaica is doing 15 things right now, 15 documented, sourced, verifiable things that Guyana, Trinidad, Barbados, and the rest of this region genuinely need to sit down and study. Some of these you've heard about, some will catch you off guard, and a few of them are the kind of slow, structural moves that don't get newspaper headlines but will absolutely determine who controls Caribbean trade, finance, and tourism for the next 3 decades. We're going to go through every single one of them. The first thing Jamaica is doing that the region isn't giving enough credit for is executing the greatest fiscal turnaround in Caribbean history. And I don't mean that loosely. Economists at the Brookings Institution, one of the most respected think tanks in the world, published a paper in 2024 examining this exact achievement. They called it, in the actual title of the paper, The Jamaica Exception. The International Monetary Fund co-authored it, Berkeley, Stanford, the IMF, all sitting down to study what Jamaica did, because they couldn't find another country that had done it the same way. Here's where Jamaica was standing in 2013. Public debt at approximately 147% of GDP. Almost no access to international capital markets. The country had already gone through a debt exchange that didn't fix anything, an IMF program that went off track, and it was, in the IMF's own words, on the verge of an economic meltdown. Jamaicans were leaving. Not visiting, leaving. Heading for London, Toronto, New York, because the island couldn't generate the kind of future that made staying worth it. Then something changed. And what changed was not a discovery of oil, it was not a foreign billionaire swooping in. It was a political decision, made across 2 different governments, 2 opposing parties, to commit to the same fiscal plan for more than 10 years and actually stick to it. In the Caribbean, where political consensus on anything longer than an election cycle is essentially unheard of. In 2013, the government, the opposition, labor unions, and employer groups sat down together and signed a Partnership for Jamaica Agreement, a social compact. It explicitly acknowledged that the debt was unsustainable and that every part of Jamaican society shared responsibility for fixing it. Then they created the Economic Program Oversight Committee, EPOC, a civil society watchdog whose entire job was to monitor whether the government was actually doing what it promised. Not just issuing reports nobody reads. Actually monitoring, naming out shortfalls in public. The Fiscal Responsibility Law added legal teeth to the whole structure. The finance minister was legally required to submit to Parliament a detailed statement every year. Not just numbers, but the strategy behind the numbers, the assumptions, the targets, and a full explanation any time the government missed them. You couldn't hide behind vague language. The law wouldn't let you. By 2023, the debt was down to 72% of GDP, the lowest in 25 years. By 2024, it was 64.9%. The legally mandated target is 60% of GDP by fiscal year 2027 to 28, and Jamaica was tracking to hit it. Then Hurricane Melissa arrived in October of 2025 and knocked things sideways. We will get to that later in this video, because that story actually proves the point rather than undermining it. The IMF's Kenji Okamura said Jamaica had built a strong track record of investing in institutions and prioritizing macroeconomic stability. The Brookings paper was more direct. It said Jamaica achieved something that countries with far more resources, bigger economies, larger workforces, actual commodity wealth, simply failed to replicate. Now compare that to the region. During the same period that Jamaica was cutting its debt, Barbados needed a full debt restructuring. Dominica took hit after hit from disasters, with almost no fiscal cushion to absorb them. Guyana and Trinidad, both sitting on significant oil and gas, still ended up needing IMF support and painful adjustments at various points. Jamaica had none of that commodity rep, none of those windfalls, and right now it is in a stronger fiscal position than most of its neighbors, with no oil, no gas, just discipline. The second thing Jamaica is doing is posting unemployment numbers that don't look real for a developing Caribbean economy. As of October 2024, Jamaica's unemployment rate hit 3.5%, a new national record low. Then it kept falling. By April 2025, it was 3.3%, 3.3. In 2013, the same year that debt was at its worst, Jamaica's unemployment rate was 9.7%. So in roughly a decade, the country cut its debt in half and its unemployment rate by more than half at the same time. You need to appreciate how unusual that combination is. Debt reduction normally requires cutting government spending. Cutting government spending normally slows economic activity and kills jobs. Jamaica managed to run both processes simultaneously. That doesn't happen by accident. That is the result of policies that are actually working. The labor force grew to over 1.4 million people. The workforce participation rate reached 68.1%. And importantly, more Jamaican women entered formal employment across more sectors than at any point in the country's recorded history. The Statistical Institute of Jamaica confirmed this across multiple survey periods. This wasn't a one-quarter blip. And still no oil, no bauxite windfall that changed everything overnight. Jamaica's employment gains are coming from tourism, from BPO services, from logistics, construction, and retail. A diversified base, which means those gains are more stable than the kind that disappear when a commodity price drops. The third thing Jamaica is doing is, on the surface, the most obvious. But the scale of it will still catch you off guard. Jamaica is running the Caribbean's most dominant tourism operation, and it isn't particularly close. In 2024, the island generated $4.3 billion in tourism revenue, the largest single-year total in Jamaica's history, confirmed by the Jamaica Tourist Board in January 2025. 4.3 million visitors came through, also a record. In 2023, arrivals had already jumped to 4.1 million, a 25.5% increase over 2022. The trajectory was accelerating going into 2024, and then 2024 exceeded the projection, $4.3 billion, in a country with a GDP of around $20 billion. That is not a rounding error in the economy. That is the economy. Approximately 175,000 Jamaicans work directly in tourism. And in just the first 5 months of 2024, Jamaica had already processed 2 million visitors and collected $1.9 billion in earnings. 2 million people in 5 months. The government launched what it calls the 5x5x5 strategy in 2020. 5 million visitors, $5 billion in annual earnings by the end of 2025. Tourism Minister Edmund Bartlett described it as right on track, heading into 2025. Hurricane Melissa then disrupted the final quarter significantly, and we'll deal with that later. The infrastructure that produced those numbers, the hotel rooms, the airline routes, the airport capacity, that was all built, and it is being rebuilt. The awards aren't close. In 2024, the World Travel Awards named Jamaica World's Leading Cruise Destination and World's Leading Family Destination for the 5th consecutive year. The Jamaica Tourist Board was named Caribbean's Leading Tourist Board for the 17th consecutive year. TripAdvisor ranked Jamaica the 11th best culinary destination globally in 2025. Emirates and Saudi Airlines launched partnerships to bring direct routes from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and India. By early 2025, Jamaica was seeing 12.9% more airline seats available compared to the same period the year before. You don't get that kind of airline commitment unless the carriers think the demand is real and growing. The fourth thing Jamaica is doing is rewriting the story of what an airport in the Caribbean can actually be. And the place you need to pay attention to is a facility most people outside Jamaica haven't heard of. Ian Fleming International Airport in Boscobel, St. Mary Parish. This was, not long ago, a tiny domestic aerodrome processing about 20,000 passengers a year. It sat on Jamaica's northeastern coast, a stretch that includes Ocho Rios, Oracabessa, and Port Antonio, scenically some of the most dramatic landscape in the Caribbean. Getting there from an international airport was the problem. Visitors landing in Kingston faced a 2 to 3 hour drive east. Those landing in Montego Bay faced an even longer one. Hotels in that corridor were losing bookings to that friction. People didn't want the journey. The government extended the runway, expanded the terminal, built it up to international standard. In February 2024, American Airlines launched the first regular U.S. commercial service into Ian Fleming, twice weekly from Miami. Within months, daily service was announced beginning December 2024. Inter-Caribbean Airways began operations there in July 2024. By the September 2025 to February 2026 period, Ian Fleming was projecting a 37% jump in overall seat capacity year over year. The airport's own manager, Claude Service, described the experience as flying boutique. Guests disembark and are at their hotels within 30 minutes. The Sandals Group built a dedicated lounge at the facility. The friction that used to push visitors away from northeastern Jamaica is disappearing. Meanwhile, at Sangster International in Montego Bay, the planning horizon is even more ambitious. The airport's authority has commissioned work on an entirely new terminal. Current long-term traffic forecasts show that even with a $26 million taxiway project and $70 million runway expansion currently underway, Sangster's existing capacity will only hold through 2034. After that, projections call for the airport to handle 15 million passengers annually, against a current capacity of roughly 5 million. The government is already designing the infrastructure for 3 times the current volume, for a generation that hasn't started traveling yet. A phased solar energy program at Sangster is being built alongside it, targeting up to 33% reduction in dependence on the national power grid. And the airport's authority is assessing the feasibility of a possible new international airport in Westmoreland, which would give Jamaica 3 internationally connected gateways. No other Caribbean island comes close to that coverage. The 5th thing Jamaica is doing is building the Caribbean's most serious port and logistics operation. And the scale of what is being constructed right now in Kingston Harbor goes well beyond moving boxes around. The Port of Kingston handled approximately 2 million TEUs in 2024, 7% growth year over year. The more important figure is this: 85 to 87% of the cargo moving through Kingston is transshipment, not goods for Jamaicans. Containers being redistributed from large ocean-going vessels to smaller ones heading to destinations across the Caribbean, Central America, and the northern coast of South America. Kingston is serving the region, not just the island. Cargo volume at the port grew roughly 60% over the past decade. When the Panama Canal expanded to accommodate the larger post-Panamax vessels, Kingston's natural harbor depth of 18 meters became one of the most strategically valuable port assets in the Western Hemisphere. No expensive dredging required, the geography was already there. In July 2025, Jamaica broke ground on the Westlands expansion project at the Kingston Freeport Terminal, a collaboration between the Port Authority of Jamaica, Kingston Freeport Terminal Limited, and CMA Terminal Holdings, the port subsidiary of CMA CGM, one of the 3 largest shipping companies on Earth. When one of the world's dominant shipping groups commits $80 million to expand a Caribbean port, that is a statement about where global trade is heading. The Westlands expansion adds 15 hectares to the terminal, targeting a 20% increase in cargo capacity. Automated cargo gates, 14 hybrid straddle carriers, new cranes. Over 450 Jamaicans employed directly in construction and operations, with 600 operators trained for the expanded facility. Prime Minister Andrew Holness described Jamaica's ambition at the groundbreaking to become a competitor to the world's great logistics hubs. That fed directly into the Cayman Special Economic Zone, also broken ground in July 2025, 700 acres plus. Direct connectivity to the Port of Kingston, Norman Manley International Airport and major roads. Solar-powered microgrids, intelligent logistics systems, recycling infrastructure, electric shuttles on site, expected to generate more than 4,000 direct and indirect jobs. The Prime Minister called it Phase 3 of a deliberate, decade-long strategy. After modernizing Kingston's terminals in Phase 1 and expanding port infrastructure in Phase 2, The declared goal is to position Jamaica as the fourth node in the international logistics chain after Rotterdam, Dubai, and Singapore. Whether a 2.9 million person Caribbean island can realistically reach that tier is a separate conversation. What is not debatable is that a Caribbean government is doing the concrete, capital-intensive, multi-decade work that competing at that level requires. That alone puts Jamaica in a different conversation from the rest of this region. The sixth thing Jamaica is doing is running the Caribbean's largest and most sophisticated business process outsourcing sector by a significant margin. And most people outside Jamaica genuinely don't understand what this industry has grown into. BPO, business process outsourcing, covers customer service, technical support, billing, financial processing, medical billing, and increasingly higher value analytical and knowledge work for companies wanting to reduce costs without sacrificing quality. Jamaica entered this space roughly 25 years ago with a handful of call centers in the Montego Bay Free Zone. Today, that industry employs approximately 55,000 Jamaicans across more than 70 operators and generates over $900 million annually. That makes it Jamaica's third largest foreign exchange earner, sitting behind only tourism and remittances. $900 million. From an industry that barely existed a generation ago. The physical footprint tells part of the story. Over 3 million square feet of purpose-built BPO space exists across Kingston, Montego Bay, Mandeville, Portmore, and other parishes. 67% of that space is now privately owned and operated. The industry has grown past the point of needing government-provided facilities. Major global names operating in Jamaica include Concentrix, Ibex, and Sagility. American companies reduce their operating costs by 40 to 60% by routing work through Jamaica compared to handling it on U.S. soil. Competitive advantages are specific. English is Jamaica's official language. No translation layer, no cultural disconnect when an American customer calls. The time zone puts Jamaica on Eastern Standard Time year-round. Seamless overlap with the entire eastern seaboard of the United States. 4 submarine cables connect the island directly to the U.S. Internet penetration is at 82.4%. Ookla ranked Jamaica second fastest in the Caribbean for mobile internet speeds in 2022. The Global Services Association of Jamaica, formed in 2012, now represents nearly 9 out of 10 BPO companies active on the island. That level of industry organization feeding directly into government policy on training, infrastructure, and investment incentives is itself a competitive asset most Caribbean islands don't have. The next phase is more interesting still. Jamaica is deliberately engineering a transition away from volume-based call center work, vulnerable to automation, toward knowledge process outsourcing. Analytics, legal research, financial modeling, medical billing work requiring judgment and expertise, not just a script. The global KPO market is at approximately $40 billion. That is more than twice Jamaica's entire GDP. Even capturing a modest fraction of that shift would be transformative. The seventh thing Jamaica is doing is pursuing a renewable energy transformation that is genuinely ambitious by Caribbean standards, with the honest acknowledgement that the work is far from finished and real challenges exist. In November 2024, Cabinet approved Jamaica's updated Integrated Resource Plan, IRP2, the country's binding long-term energy blueprint. It sets a target of 50% of electricity generation from renewable sources by 2030, prioritizing wind, hydro, and solar, with battery energy storage systems for grid stability as the renewable share grows. That same month, the generation procurement entity awarded contracts for 99.83 megawatts of new solar capacity to Wigton Energy Limited and Sunterra Energy Jamaica. Both have their generation licenses and are expected to connect to the grid by 2027. An additional 220 megawatts of utility-scale renewables with storage is scheduled for competitive procurement through 2025. Jamaica Power Service is simultaneously replacing 171.5 megawatts of retiring fossil fuel generation with renewables. When all of that comes online, Jamaica's renewable share will approach 48%, within reach of the 50% target. As of December 2024, Jamaica's installed renewable capacity stood at 188 megawatts, generating approximately 481,000 megawatt-hours annually, 10% of total electricity production. The Wigton Wind Farm in Manchester Parish remains the largest wind farm in the English-speaking Caribbean. In 2024, Jamaica moved up 8 places in the Bloomberg NEA Climate Scope Report, ranking 10th in Latin America and the Caribbean for renewable energy investment attractiveness. Energy Minister Hon. Darrell Vaz described it as reflecting clear and strong policy direction, regulatory improvements and investment incentives. The counterpoint, and it's a real one, is that as of 2023, only about 12% of Jamaica's electricity was coming from renewables. Getting from 12% to 50% in 7 years is a steep climb. Energy costs remain one of the most persistent structural burdens on Jamaican businesses and households. Jamaica's oil trade deficit is nearly 7% of GDP, the highest share in the Caribbean and Central America. The policy direction is credible. The execution will determine whether the ambition becomes the outcome. The 8th thing Jamaica is doing is one that doesn't get the attention it deserves. And that's because most people don't understand what being on the FATF grey list actually does to a country's economy. In June 2024, Jamaica was officially removed from it. The Financial Action Task Force grey list is the international designation for countries identified as having strategic weaknesses in their systems for combating money laundering and terrorism financing. Being on it means that banks and financial institutions worldwide are required to apply enhanced scrutiny to every transaction involving your country. In practice, your businesses pay more to move money internationally. Your remittance corridors get flagged and sometimes blocked. Your access to correspondent banking, the relationships your local banks need to transfer funds across borders, gets complicated and expensive. International investors apply a higher risk premium to anything they consider putting into your economy. Jamaica landed on the grey list in February 2020. Then COVID hit, and the government had to simultaneously manage a pandemic and a 13-point reform action plan demanded by FATF as the price of removal. They delivered on both. By January 2024, Jamaica had achieved compliance with 37 of FATF's 40 recommendations. Critically, the Ministry of Finance noted that Jamaica had become the only country in the world fully compliant with recommendations 24 and 25, the ones addressing transparency and beneficial ownership of legal persons, the structures most commonly used to hide dirty money. Full compliance with those two globally is described by the ministry itself as a very rare achievement. On June 28, 2024, at the FATF plenary in Singapore, Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark announced the removal. His words' accomplishment enhances Jamaica's reputation on the global stage. It also fosters a more secure and stable economic environment and investment atmosphere for our citizens, investors and entrepreneurs. The practical effects are direct: smoother cross-border financial transactions, lower correspondent banking costs, reduced scrutiny on remittance flows. For a country where remittances represent roughly 19% of GDP, smoother remittance channels alone have material economic impact. And then Jamaica went further. By December 2024, it had assumed the chairmanship of the FATF, the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. The country that was on the grey list 4 years earlier is now leading the regional anti-money laundering body. That is a deliberate demonstration of institutional credibility, not a coincidence. The 9th thing Jamaica is doing is something that took nearly 40 years of effort to land, and it arrived in July 2025. Port Royal earned UNESCO World Heritage status. On July 12, 2025, the World Heritage Committee meeting in Paris inscribed the archaeological ensemble of 17th century Port Royal on the UNESCO World Heritage list, Jamaica's second World Heritage site, after the Blue and John Crow Mountains received the designation a decade earlier in 2015. A milestone for Jamaica and for the English-speaking Caribbean as a whole. Port Royal sits at the mouth of Kingston Harbour. In the 17th century, it was genuinely described as the richest and wickedest city on earth, the most important English settlement in the Western Hemisphere, a hub for Atlantic trade, for the movement of enslaved Africans, and for pirates whose names are still part of the regional imagination. Henry Morgan operated from here. On June 7, 1692, a catastrophic earthquake dropped much of the city beneath the sea. Those submerged ruins have been there for over 300 years, preserved in remarkable condition. The inscription came under UNESCO criteria 4 and 6, recognizing Port Royal as an outstanding example of a historical ensemble that reflects a defining moment in the Atlantic world's history. Culture Minister Hon. Olivia Grange called it the realization of almost 40 years of national effort. Mexico, Canada, the Netherlands, and Japan all supported the nomination. The formal certificate was handed over at a Kingston ceremony on August 25, 2025 by UNESCO Regional Director Eric Falt, who described Port Royal as a site that tells a story of prosperity and human cost. For Jamaica's tourism operation, the implications are concrete. UNESCO inscription consistently boosts visitation and extends average visitor spending at heritage sites. Port Royal isn't another beach resort. It's guided underwater tours of a submerged 17th century city. It's Fort Charles, its history that exists nowhere else on Earth. Now globally recognized, officially protected, and on every heritage traveler's map. The 10th thing Jamaica is doing is winning at a sport it has no business dominating, based purely on population, and yet has done so consistently for nearly 2 decades. Jamaica has 2.9 million people. The United States has 330 million. No rational athletic resource model predicts that a Caribbean island of this size should be the most dominant sprinting nation on the planet. And yet, Usain Bolt was born on August 21, 1986 in Sherwood Content, Trelawney. His father worked a coffee farm. The town had no running water when Bolt was growing up. He carried water pails for miles as a child. A cricket coach noticed how fast he moved and directed him toward track and field. By the time he retired in 2017, he held world records in the 100 meters at 9.58 seconds and the 200 meters at 19.19 seconds. Both set at the 2009 World Championships in Berlin and both still unbroken going into 2026. He is the only sprinter in history to win the Olympic 100 and 200 meters at 3 consecutive games. Beijing, London 2012, Rio 2016, 8 Olympic gold medals, 11 World Championship titles. But Bolt is not the story, he's the product. The story is the system that keeps producing people like him from a country this size. The Inter-Secondary Schools Boys and Girls Championships, CHAMPS, is Jamaica's annual high school athletics competition, attended by up to 30,000 people. Scouts, coaches, and national selectors treat it as the most important talent identification event in Caribbean sport. For young Jamaicans, a strong showing at CHAMPS can lead to scholarships, professional training, and a genuine path to the Olympics. Bolt came through it. Shelley Ann Fraser-Price, the Pocket Rocket, one of the most decorated female sprinters in history, came through it. Johan Blake came through it. Elaine Thompson-Herah completed the women's sprint double at the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. And in October 2025 at the World Athletics Championships in Tokyo, Jamaica reclaimed the men's 100-meter world title, a decade after Bolt's last individual world championship gold. The conveyor belt is still running. In May 2025, Usain Bolt was officially appointed Global Ambassador for Tourism in Jamaica by the Jamaica Tourist Board. His foundation contributed over $6 million Jamaican dollars in 2025 to support young athletes at national championships and help bring electricity, sewage systems, running water, and a community center to Sherwood Content, the town where he grew up without any of those things. The man who left poor came back and built the infrastructure his community never had. The 11th thing Jamaica is doing is operating a cultural empire built on one man and one genre of music, generating global influence at a scale almost no nation this size has achieved, and still growing more than 4 decades after that man's death. Bob Marley was born on February 6, 1945 in 9 Mile, St. Anne Parish. He died on May 11, 1981, 36 years old. In the 40-plus years since, his reach has not contracted, it has compounded. His 1984 compilation album Legend is the best-selling reggae album in history. Time magazine named his 1977 album Exodus the album of the century. In 1976, 2 days after an assassination attempt at his Kingston home, he performed before tens of thousands at the Smile Jamaica concert. Still bandaged, still present. In 1978, at the One Love Peace concert, he brought Jamaica's 2 political rivals, Prime Minister Michael Manley and opposition leader Edward Saiga, onto the stage together, joined their hands above his head, and produced one of the most iconic images in Caribbean political history. In 1980, his song Zimbabwe became the unofficial anthem of that nation's independence, and he performed at the celebration in Harare, Marley didn't export music, he exported a philosophy, a framework of resistance, unity, and spiritual grounding that people in South Africa, Japan, Germany, and New Zealand found personally relevant in their own languages, applied to their own circumstances. That almost never travels successfully from a small island, his did. In 2018, UNESCO enshrined reggae music on the list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity, tied specifically to Jamaica. The 2024 biographical film Bob Marley, One Love, directed by Reinaldo Marcus Green and starring Kingsley Ben-Adir, brought the story to a new generation globally. Sons Damien, Stephen, and Ziggy Marley continue to extend the cultural footprint across music, film, hospitality, and philanthropy. Stephen has won multiple Grammy Awards. Damien commands international audiences blending reggae and hip-hop. Every February, Jamaica formally observes Reggae Month, concerts in Kingston, tributes in Montego Bay, diaspora events in London, New York, and Toronto. The 80th birthday of Bob Marley, in February 2025, generated international media coverage that no marketing budget could have purchased. Younger Jamaican artists are carrying the momentum forward. Coffee won a Grammy Award for her EP Rapture. Protégé has built a genuine global following. Each new wave finds new audiences, partly because the foundation Marley built is structurally solid enough to carry the weight of what comes after. Jamaica's cultural exports, reggae, dancehall, the Rastafarian worldview, the cuisine, the vernacular, represent a form of soft power that tiny nations almost never exercise. Jamaica exercises it continuously. There is no Caribbean equivalent. The 12th thing Jamaica is doing is maintaining the most significant diaspora remittance relationship in the Caribbean as a share of the economy and starting to leverage that connection more deliberately for national development. In 2024, Jamaica received approximately $3.6 billion in remittances, representing roughly 19% of GDP. To feel what that means, for nearly every person living inside Jamaica, there is one Jamaican living abroad. The country has been sending its people to the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States for generations, and those people send money home, consistently. Through recessions and pandemics and political turbulence, 90% of those flows come from three countries: the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. The Caribbean Policy Research Institute calculated that the diaspora's total contribution to Jamaica, remittances, investment, philanthropy, tourism spending, and exports, represents approximately 28% of national output. 28% of everything the economy produces has the diaspora's fingerprint on it. That is not supplementary income. That is a structural pillar. The Jamaican government operates the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council, 30 members drawn from Africa, Asia, the Pacific, Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East to formalize the connection between the island and its scattered population. The National Diaspora Policy actively encourages diaspora members to bring capital, expertise, and skills back home. The Jamaica Stock Exchange has partnered with diaspora organizations to educate second, third, and fourth-generation Jamaicans abroad about investment opportunities on the island. Capri's research found that unrealized diaspora investment, money sitting in savings accounts in Toronto, Birmingham, and New York that could flow back to Jamaica but currently doesn't, represents at minimum an additional 11% of GDP annually. The FATF removal helps unlock that. The debt reduction and currency stability help. Every institutional improvement Jamaica makes is, in part, an argument directed at the diaspora. The conditions are different now. Come back, invest, build something. The 13th thing Jamaica is doing is running a stock exchange that, at its peak, outperformed every other stock market on Earth, and whose structure is deliberately designed to do something for Jamaican businesses that most Caribbean islands have never figured out how to build. The Jamaica Stock Exchange is the first stock exchange established in the English-speaking Caribbean. Trading opened February 3, 1969. More than 50 years later, it operates 5 distinct markets: the main market, the junior market, the U.S. dollar equities market, the bond market, and the preference share market. In 2015, Bloomberg ranked the Jamaica Stock Exchange as the #1 performing stock market in the world. Not the Caribbean, the world. It happened again in 2018. Returns on Jamaican-listed equities during those periods outpaced Wall Street, London, Hong Kong, and every other major bourse on the planet. The junior market is worth particular attention. It exists specifically to give smaller Jamaican businesses access to capital they would otherwise never be able to raise. Tax incentives are attached to listings. The application process is designed for companies too small for the main market, but too ambitious to stay fully dependent on bank debt. The result is an ecosystem where a local Jamaican manufacturer or services company can raise equity financing from ordinary Jamaican retail investors, not from foreign institutions, not from wealthy individuals abroad, from Jamaicans themselves. That kind of democratized capital formation compounds quietly. Jamaican businesses can grow without becoming structurally dependent on external creditors. Jamaican households can hold stakes in the growth they see happening around them. The wealth generated by Jamaica's expanding private sector has a mechanism to stay on the island rather than flowing entirely to foreign shareholders. Over time, that matters. The 14th thing Jamaica is doing is something you can only see clearly in retrospect, and the proof of it arrived on October 28, 2025, in the most brutal possible way. Hurricane Melissa made landfall in Jamaica that day as a Category 5 storm, the most destructive hurricane in Jamaica's recorded history. Damages and losses estimated at $12.5 billion, approximately 60% of the country's entire 2024 GDP. The terminal at Sangster International Airport was severely damaged. Tourism arrivals in November dropped 68%. Passenger traffic at Sangster fell 73.4% that month. The economy contracted an estimated 0.4% in 2025 and is expected to decline a further 1% in 2026 before recovery takes hold. $12.5 billion, 60% of a year's GDP, one storm, and Jamaica did not experience a fiscal crisis. It did not require emergency debt restructuring. It did not collapse into the trap that has broken other Caribbean nations after major disasters, where a government with no money, no credit access, no insurance, and no multilateral relationships has no choice but to slash services and borrow at punishing rates to rebuild. Jamaica had built the instruments before the storm came. The Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, the CCRIF, provides parametric insurance payouts that trigger automatically when weather events hit defined thresholds. Jamaica had prepared for this. It activated the IMF Contingencies Fund. It drew on a contingent credit facility through the Inter-American Development Bank. None of these were improvised responses. They were pre-negotiated instruments, available precisely because Jamaica had built the institutional credibility over years of discipline to access them when it needed them. The IMF noted that while the hurricane set back the debt reduction path, public debt now expected to temporarily rise to 68.5% of GDP before resuming its descent, the fundamental fiscal architecture remained intact. The Fiscal Responsibility Law's escape clause was designed for exactly this kind of event and was activated. Jamaica had used it during COVID as well, briefly and responsibly, before returning to its targets. A rebound is projected for 2027 and 2028, averaging 2.7% growth, driven by reconstruction and gradual normalization of tourism and agriculture. The ports were not destroyed. The airports are being rebuilt. The BPO sector continued operating. The renewable energy projects are on schedule. The momentum was interrupted. It was not eliminated. That is what a decade of institutional preparation actually buys you. Without those buffers, the CSCRIF coverage, the IMF relationship, the fiscal credibility, the cross-party consensus that kept the frameworks intact, a $12.5 billion storm event would have meant something far worse. It didn't, because the work had been done years before Melissa arrived. The 15th and final thing Jamaica is doing, and in some ways the one that makes every other item on this list possible, is something that sounds boring, but is actually the rarest thing in Caribbean governance. Jamaica is planning, long-term, institutionally, across election cycles, with legal frameworks that outlast individual governments. In a region where that combination almost never exists, Jamaica has built it. The Vision 2030 National Development Plan is Jamaica's overarching framework. Energy policy, education targets, poverty reduction benchmarks, environmental resilience goals, economic diversification objectives. The 50% renewables target comes from it. The debt reduction path is consistent with it. The logistics hub strategy extends from it. The Sangster Airport Master Plan running through 2054 is built on it. The Fiscal Responsibility Law is not a political promise. It is binding legislation with legal consequences for non-compliance. The Independent Fiscal Commission, operational since January 2025, adds a layer of independent oversight that cannot be dismantled at the discretion of any individual government. It is structurally protected from the political cycle. Jamaica's Basel III transition for banks, its exchange rate management framework, its data adequacy initiatives, the expansion of the Bank of Jamaica's supervisory perimeter. These are the unglamorous, unsexy pieces of economic architecture that most Caribbean citizens never think about and most Caribbean governments never finish constructing. Jamaica has been building them, one piece at a time, for over a decade. The result is observable. Airlines open new routes because they trust the regulatory stability. Shipping companies commit $80 million to expand the port because they believe the business case has long-term foundation. Global BPO operators train thousands of Jamaican workers because they need the kind of country stability that justifies that upfront investment. UNESCO inscribes Jamaica's heritage. FATF certifies Jamaica's financial governance. The IMF commends Jamaica's institutions. Bloomberg ranks Jamaica's stock exchange as the world's best. All from the same island, in the same decade. None of this means Jamaica has solved its problems. Crime remains a serious challenge. Long-term productivity growth has been slow. Youth unemployment, while significantly improved, still needs attention. Energy costs are still too high. The informal economy is large. Hurricane Melissa wiped out years of fiscal progress in days. These limitations are real. But look at the direction. And look at the distance covered, from the near meltdown of 2013 to the institutional credibility of 2024. That distance is not trivial. Very few countries, anywhere, have made that journey. Guyana is discovering oil money. Trinidad has had gas revenue for decades. Barbados rebuilt after debt restructuring. The Dominican Republic is expanding aggressively. Each has advantages Jamaica does not. And Jamaica is still the one being written about in Brookings' papers. The one the IMF holds up as a model for small states. One airlines want to fly to, shipping companies want to invest in, and tourists visit in record numbers. With no oil, no gas, no mineral windfall. The 15 things we've walked through today are documented, sourced, verifiable. The debt halved, the unemployment record, the $4.3 billion in tourism revenue, the UNESCO inscription, the FATF clean bill, the port expansion, the Guyana Special Economic Zone, the Ian Fleming Airport transformation, the BPO empire, the renewable energy transition, the stock exchange that was ranked #1 in the world, the remittance engine, the Sprint dynasty, the Bob Marley cultural machine, the disaster resilience that absorbed Melissa without a fiscal collapse. These are the things a country does when it decides, collectively, across governments, across political parties, across a decade, that the future is worth building toward. Jamaica made that decision around 2013. The rest of the region is still deciding. If the rest of the Caribbean doesn't seriously study what is being built in Kingston and Montego Bay and Boscobel, and at the port of Kingston, if our governments are still having the same circular conversations about fiscal reform and institutional development in another decade, while Jamaica keeps executing, then the gap between what Jamaica is becoming and what the rest of us could have been will be the story our grandchildren find when they go looking for answers about why this region fell behind. And by then it will be too late to catch up.